Good morning, everyone.
Hey there, morning.
Hey.
Morning. Yeah, how's it going?
Yeah, not bad, thanks. How's everyone's new year?
Happy New Year.
Good.
Jay, that's a sweet background you got there, man.
Yeah, it's one of the shields. It's the second shield that was made for my fraternity. Shields dated back to 19. I want to say this was 1921 that this shield. It's long since changed, but this happens to be my favorite one. So it's when I like.
It's very cool. I like it. All right, we're just going to give people a couple of minutes and then we'll get started. How are you doing, Melba?
Hey, Isaac. Sorry, Jay, for messing you up there. I hit enter on his
name. No worries, no worries. How's your new year going?
Okay, except this past weekend and yesterday was full of nothing but sick kids. So that was fun.
Oh my goodness. Yeah, you know what? I hear you. So my wife had to dash out of town yesterday on an emergency family thing. So I'm solo parenting with the two kids. My boss is out sick, and today's a snow day here in Boulder. So two kids are at home. And yeah, so if I get interrupted, that's what's going on. So I'm having a crazy time too.
I feel for you. I feel for you. I kicked my kids out today. I was like, no, you're going to school. you're not staying home anymore.
Oh, right, I know. Well, it crossed my mind to send my kids out first thing to go get firewood so we could light a fire and keep warm. But they got away with getting up and just getting themselves breakfast and having screen time, of course. So here we are. Okay, I'm going to try and share this thing here. Share screen. I think. Can everyone see my screen?
Yep.
Wonderful. Okay, cool. So what I hoped we do today, so I put in the agenda, we've got 3 items, and we'll see how far we get down the agenda. This document, we talked last time about, having, we have something about, OpenSSF top level vision, direction, scope, what's the OpenSSF about? And then I think, we have individual projects like Salsa and Fresca and S2C2F and so on. Joshua, shh, don't tell everyone. But we have what we don't have is a really crisp and clear kind of North Star or direction for the supply chain integrity working group, which kind of sits between the two. The supply chain integrity working group contains Salsa and Fresca and S2C2F and who knows what else in the future. But itself doesn't have really much of an actionable or helpful North Star. I mean, I read the charter. You can all read the charter too. It's linked from the top of the note stock. It's broad. It's generic. It doesn't seem that it would be particularly helpful in guiding day-to-day decisions and directions. And that's kind of what I'm hoping we can jointly produce. A document which, and I think Melvin made the comment that hopefully we don't touch very much. Hopefully we don't have to continue editing and refining it. Hopefully we set this and say, you know what, this is probably going to orient and guide us for the next year or even two. And then there'll be lots of activities at the day-to-day level in the individual projects and SIGs. But this will continue to be our North Star. So with that in mind, I've done several pings in Slack about this doc. I know a lot of you reviewed it, provided comments, for which many thanks. My proposal is, first of all, just to kind of open the floor, see if anyone's got any general comments, like does this, with the problem I've identified about having a missing middle, not having something which guides and orients and helps with day-to-day decision making, does anyone have opinions about whether this doc gets us towards that? I mean, it feels to me, I mean, I say it with my author's bias, but it feels to me like we're kind of within a standard deviation or so of what we need. But I want to, get y'all's perceptions and thoughts too, just before we dive into the individual comments. Any thoughts? Got a thumbs up from Joshua. Okay. Well, in that case, we can dive into individual comments. And what I want to do, I don't propose that we read through the doc top to bottom. I propose we do a quick view at each comment, and for each one decide, what do we want to do? Do we want to assign an action? I kind of figure that some of these will be action with me to clarify or work the comment into the doc. So this first comment here about the shared vocabulary and problem model for the industry, Ori's got a good point here about, hey, what vocabularies we're talking about. My intention really was not in terms of, formalizing or coming up with a prescriptive or normative standard. It was more the observation that, today, I think that Salsa itself and salsa.dev has already provided a useful set of vocab for the industry. Like when people say, provenance now, Salsa provides a useful definition, a useful anchor for that term when people think about provenance. And I've heard people, talk about, oh, wouldn't it be great to have an SBOM that, links a binary to individual source files? And I'm like, well, that's not quite an SBOM. I think you're more talking about binary provenance. But again, my thought is that we don't need to get super formal with this vocabulary, but more recognize that part of the value that we're providing in the supply chain integrity group is, just normalizing some of these concepts at a high level and start to encourage people to use the same words for the same things. Does anyone disagree or have any additional thoughts on that?
Yeah, so, whenever we talk about any type of standardization, with respective concepts or terms or vocabulary like that, my first question is always, how in sync are we with best practices, right? With the best practices working group and the initiatives that they have around building guides, and also their glossary, they're building a glossary of terms, etc., right? And I think always, while I mean, the argument comes back, well, you don't want to have this dictate that, or that dictate this, which is all true. But I do think as far as the OpenSSF is concerned, we should be speaking with one voice across the entirety of the OpenSSF. And I think that's the idea behind the Diagrammer Society and trying to build trying to build those schemas and trying to build that nomenclature across the board. Like, hey, what is everyone doing? How does it all relate to what's every working group doing? How does it align with each working group, or what? How does it align against the broader mission like that? I'm just thinking this is great, and this is exactly what we should be doing, because S2C2F, Salsa, Fresca, and anything else we do, the terms should all somewhat look the same in order for them to have the proper balance and alignment with one another. But so should how we communicate these terms and how we communicate these specs across the entirety of the OpenSSF when we're reaching out to different parts of the industry with respect to what each working group is trying to do, right? So I go back to it and say, are we making sure that we're aligning one way or the other, whether it's our terms are the best ones that they should use, right? So take from us and then put into your glossary, or should we take from that glossary and bring it back, bring some of those terms back to what we're doing here? I'll leave that up to the room, and that's actually that open discussion we need to have. But thinking that way so that across the OpenSSF we're speaking with one voice.
No, I love that. I think that's exactly right. And I'm going to add some notes and tag the comments as we go here with follow-up. And so I'll definitely make that note here. Joshua, you have your hand up.
Yeah, I just wanted to, I completely agree that we need a shared vocabulary and problem model. I think we need to, I see this as being a phase thing. Like, we need to get our own house in order, like the SEI, WG, and the projects that form part of that. Then we can try and get cross OpenSSF agreement or normalization of terms. The industry is going to be a long battle. Provenance, Salsa's definition of provenance does not agree with how half of the people I talk to interpret provenance. It's an ongoing battle. So I think I fully agree with the goal. Let's just be aware that this is a long-term thing, but having a set of definitions we all agree on that we can start socializing is super valuable.
Love it. I'm going to follow up with you about those conflicting definitions of provenance. I'm super interested. I've seen some of that emerging here internally at Google as well, and I'm trying to get a handle on it. So I'd love to hear what you're seeing too. Okay, I'm going to close out on that one. And I've got some follow-ups tagged in the comment here so that we don't forget what we're up to. This point about interoperability here, Ori raised, I think that there's much that's easy to say and hard to define. A more concrete definition, I struggle with this a little bit. I mean, I wrote ready interoperability, meaning that, hey, we have, supply chain by its nature is a chain with, parts of the chain living in different organizations, perhaps living in different technology ecosystems, perhaps living in the open source domain and, parts of it in the closed source domain. And so I meant interoperability, that these various domains, whether you divide it by language ecosystem or by technology or by open closed source or across organizational boundaries, that the various pieces of the supply chain interoperate and speak themselves a common language. Does anyone have any thoughts on how we can make that clearer, to Ori's point? Josh?
Yeah, I think we are looking for a coherent, interoperable set of projects within the working group. When I was thinking about this a bit earlier and adding comments to the doc, it's not entirely clear to me, because I haven't had a chance to dig into them, how scorecards, and I think you refer to it as S2, but the acronym that I cannot remember.
Yes, S2C2F, yeah.
Well done. How they interact, right? And how, I think the first step for interoperability is that kind of consistent narrative, and that all of the solutions and tools that are developed within the context of this working group have a consistent narrative and can be coherently plugged together into a secure software supply chain. That's the first step for interoperability, I think. And then, part of that is just being super crisp about what the interfaces are between them, and therefore what the APIs or data formats or whatever that they expose, and therefore can be adopted more broadly. That's how I would interpret that.
That makes sense. I'll add a little bit more detail. I don't want to get this. I don't want this document to kind of veer too far into problem solving, but more describing the problem. But I will. Your comments there are on point, Joshua, and I'll work those in. Thank you. Let's see. Do we have Abdullah on the call here?
Yep, I'm here.
Hey, there you are.
Hey,
give me a little bit more on what you're looking for here, and help me understand this part. I think enterprise interop and enterprise are a really key part of the overall story here, so I really want to make sure I understand it.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, we're calling out the pragmatic supply chain security framework, right? Then covering key functional areas from my perspective would be making sure vulnerability management is involved, procurement, depending on how kind of like the software is ingested, right? So I guess from an enterprise view, how do all the parts from a domain perspective come together, right?
Yep.
Does that make sense to everyone?
Makes
Is
sense
that
to
clear?
me.
Cool. Yep.
Okay. Melba, I think I unilaterally gave you an action here to reword this one to your preference. I think we're talking about the same thing and just wordsmithing here. So unless anyone has additional comments on this one, I propose we move on to the next. And Melba, you can take that one up offline. The point about Fresca here. Do we have Mr. Lieberman with us today? I don't think we do. Melba, can you help me understand your thinking on this one?
Yeah, it was because it said, if you scroll up, see also Fresca. And so my point was, hey, we shouldn't limit ourselves to just Fresca.
Right.
Because there is tooling coming from the different subgroups, SALSA, potentially S2C2F, and maybe there might be more down the road. So my recommendation was don't just say Fresca or remove it altogether. But Mike said, well, what if we do e.g. an example, Fresca? And so I like more of the example versus see also Fresca, because that's almost saying like that's the de facto, that's what we're focusing on.
Got it.
So I think an example would be better than see also. Again, it's wordsmithing.
Oh, but it's important. Like, I mean, we're hoping this document lasts a while. We're going to have lots of people look at it. Some with, everyone with varying degrees of context. So I appreciate the value of wordsmithing, and I think it's important that we get this right. So I'll make that change and clarify. Interesting one here. Do we have William? Oh, we do have William here today. I would love to hear your additional thoughts on this, and Melba, you too. I'll give you what my intent was with this, that this framework shouldn't require, for you to get value from this framework, it shouldn't require that you trust GitHub or you trust Google or you trust Microsoft or you trust this entity or that entity, or ideally it should be, that who you trust should be up to you. And me as a consumer, I can say, well, I trust PyPI and I trust GitHub, and that is going to give me the anchors from which my policy decisions will be based. It's not up to the framework to tell me who is trustworthy in this ecosystem. That was my intent with this. But William, Melba, give me your thoughts.
So I think my understanding was exactly what you just described. And I think that is, I agree what we should be saying here. I was responding to Ori's comment of consumer selected versus he was suggesting regulator selected. And I think what Melvin and I were kind of saying there was, well, I was first saying, like, I think consumers can select if they want to have a regulator selected, sort of subsumes that. And then Melba's comment was, have we really defined what we meant by a consumer in this? And I could see a consumer being what you described. Someone with a different context could view consumer being an end consumer or a company using software from a provider. So I think we were clear the consumer is really a consumer of like the supply chain, right? Because that's really the focus here. And that's kind of what we mean. We can clarify that and I think we're fine. Great.
That's so I'll note that. I think that echoes some other comments also in the doc about consumer, and Josh had a different preferred term. I think consumer is it's great because, hey, it's about consuming software. It's terrible because some people think consumer means end consumer, or someone who goes and buys software retail off the shelf at Best Buy. some people think about consumer as someone who uses something up and consumes it gradually over time until there's nothing left, neither of which is intended here. So I will, I'll close this out with additional clarity, but I think it sounds like we're agreed on the principle.
One piece maybe to satisfy Ori's comment would be if we're clear, maybe you could expand the language there to say consumer selected, include, like, so that it's flexible enough, like they may have other regulations or other requirements, just sort of expanding that it's not just, you know, one person or one entity in theirs, but they may have other dependent requirements that they can select from. I think that's kind of what we're getting at.
That's a good point. And so I'm just writing the consumer may include anchors suitable for their own regulatory context, given that, you know, every consumer is going to exist in a different, you know, regulatory domain. And hey, you know, in the EU, maybe there will be a requirement to trust this entity or that entity. Who knows? But it's a good point. I will note that. Okay, scrolling down. I think this is a totally fine point. I mean, I noticed that lots more needed. Ori made a specific suggestion about what could be included in that lots. I agree with it. And Abdullah, it looks like you do too. And so I'll put some additional thought and work into that. And I invite you all to do the same, actually. Anyone who requests edit access to this document, I'll give it. I just don't want to make it editable by the entire internet because it feels like that's something of a recipe for disaster. Melba, you made the point that we could up level Fresca to the top level.
Yeah, I think even Mike said that they had like a roadmap for 2023. So just like Salsa and S2C2F, we should call it out as, you know, what they have done in 2022 and not kind of an afterthought.
Yep. It's a good point. And it again reflects my authorial bias that Fresca is the area I know least about. And so there we go. Okay. So let's have, what are we talking about here? Oh yes, collaboration. And Melba, I really agree with your point here that I think that, you know, we should be cautious about trying to boil the ocean and trying to immediately go from 0 to 100 and like kind of, you know, from going from an insular community to one that includes the entire world in its collaborative universe. And I think we have a natural set of concentric rings here with, you know, Salsa, you know, next scope up is SCI, next scope up is OpenSSF, next scope up is LF, and so on. And we can work on collaboration in that order. And I think that, you know, I mean, I don't know whether you wrote it, but getting our own house in order first. Like, let's get good at collaboration within our own group and then the group surrounding us, and then work out from there rather than try and solve everything at once. And I very much agree with that. So I'll work on adding that as a top level priority and note the approach.
So just to add on to that, Isaac, I think we can add like better communication with those other groups prior to like more explicit, more active collaboration, right? Like being more aware of what they're doing and better communicating what we are doing is a first step that we can call out separately to a more deeper engagement and collaboration.
Yeah. Cool. Okay. Specific outreach plan. Malby, you got me and Joshua both ganging up on you now about this the SCI positioning idea. I mean, it feels to me, I mean, certainly looking actually at the notes that you shared from the positioning meeting yesterday, it feels to me like you're already doing the work of SCI positioning. And at this stage, actually, it's probably more just about renaming the thing, to be honest. I mean, looking at Salsa positioning, you're already thinking about Salsa and Fresca and S2C2F and other things and how they all fit together. And so I think that, you know, yeah, it just as a matter of pragmatics, you're already doing the work, and it's just a matter of you know, renaming the thing to reflect the scope you're actually working on. But I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, I think we would need and make sure that there are co-leads from the other groups, right? Because I don't know everything about Fresca. I don't know everything about S2C2F. So as long as we have co-leads from each of the different subgroups, then I think we would be fine. But that would be the biggest challenge.
Well, I know in the positioning, I mean, you got me.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah,
I'm already there with you, Mo.
yeah,
So I mean, we talked about this into last year, and this was just this colored inside the lines of where we were headed when we're talking about this focus right here, right? And how we position everything coming together. I think the one thing that like, if we join the last statement about collaboration and getting our own house in order, and then merging that into this when it comes to positioning, I think those things work hand in hand, right? You get our own house in order where we're at with Salsa, S2C2F, Fresca. I mean, hell, there are other things that happen out there too. And the point about getting our house in order is just that I know in the CDF, in their supply chain integrity working group, they're working on something over there, a maturity model over there that's supposed to be something bolted onto the back end of Salsa. And they actually say this inside of their repo, inside of their working group, that it's to bundle all of the artifacts that are being created through these things in such a way that they can be archived properly, and that's what's being discussed over there. So we get our house in order and then do some of that outreach too. But that can only happen if we do what we're talking about here, and then of course maybe raise positioning up to the point where once we have our house in order, we can properly position some of the things we're doing and creating those conversations, so that when we take those tentacles and reach out, we're reaching out with that one voice, right? I mean, that all makes perfect sense.
It's a good point, Jay, that we should make sure that we have, in the first instance, a situational awareness of the adjacencies around us. What, like you say, I mean, there's the supply chain maturity working group in the CDF that's chaired by actually a colleague of mine at Google, and perhaps we could have him come and talk to us sometime about his intent of what he's doing. But step one is like kind of becoming aware of these adjacencies. Step two is kind of figuring out how we fit alongside them, or where we don't fit, or where we need more active collaboration. And then step three is providing a map of the entire universe, OpenSSF just being one galaxy. Quickly on companies, I can clarify this in the doc mail, but my intent was, if we decide here, this is what we want to do. We want to think about, supply chain integrity in the macro. We want to think about this Uber framework. We may decide that we don't have sufficient representation in the OpenSSF to succeed. We may decide that, gosh, wouldn't it be great to have a couple of folks from Amazon who are really leaning in, or maybe two from GitHub, or I don't know, Ancore, or I mean, I don't know. I'm just suggesting that we can open our doors and see who walks in, and we've got a great set of people here already, and great representation from IBM and Microsoft and VMware and AMD and Intel and the rest. It could be that if we take this more deliberate approach, we may decide, gosh, we need to go find some people from company X or company Y or company Z and encourage / strong arm them to participate. That was the intent. Does that make sense, Melba?
it does. I don't want folks to think that we're trying to play favoritism, right? To
Yeah.
different companies. And so that's why I asked the question, is it funding related? If it's about, like you said, ecosystems, right? Perhaps we say, partners in the industry that, that manage ecosystems or something, making sure that we're not making it seem, like I said, that it's favoritism or it's about funding, right? If it is, okay, then we should state that. But if it's not, I think we need to be a little clearer about why companies and what the intent is behind that.
I love that point. Made a note here in the comments, and I'll clarify in the doc. I think that's really important. And this is why we're going to end up with a better document from the fact that we're all looking at it versus just me. So thank you. Mr. Lieberman, you have your hand up.
Oh, yeah. And I think, I agree with Melba on that one. And another thing just to be cognizant of is, I believe late last year, the governing board did vote on the sort of new direction for 2023, which includes sort of that, like, they're calling, hey, I don't know if it's an open source tool chain but like pretty much trying to kind of really push the open bit of OpenSSF. And so I think the idea should be also we should be focused around organizations where, at least the core of it is open.
Yep. Noted. Great point as well. And yeah, a good reminder that OpenSSF has the word open in it for a reason. Let's see. We have a comment here about Fresca again, and I think, again, Michael, I'm not sure whether you were here when I, declared my biases. Fresca is an area that I'm, out of everything that we have in scope for SCI working group, Fresca is the one I'm least familiar with, and so please forgive me and also educate me.
Sure. Yeah. I could definitely help out here. So, the quick sort of elevator pitch, right, was Fresca started off as, hey, we tie together a bunch of Linux Foundation tools like Tecton and Spire and a bunch of other also open source tools into a secure build system. So something like, you could imagine something like GitHub Actions or whatever, but it's like Tecton, but with opinions on top of it, where, this is the secure way to run it, yada, yada. And based on some other discussions out in Japan at Open Source Summit, there was some discussions between a few other folks at OpenSSF, like Brian, and there was some there is some interest in potentially making OpenSSF a bit opinionated about, like, hey, if here's a bunch of Linux Foundation tools that could be a demonstrative architecture that could, or be tied together in a demonstrative architecture. Once again, not the only architecture, not a reference architecture, but something that is like, hey, if you use these tools configured in these ways, we think you can, secure your supply chain, secure your applications, et cetera. That seems to be one of the things that's kind of coming out there. And so one of the things that was brought up was like, hey, Fresca is doing part of that already a little bit for the build, right? It's not, Fresca was not some new build system built from scratch. It was tying together existing sort of open source tools. So that's kind of where Fresca is today. But there was, there was some interest as to whether or not, how do we sort of expand that into what the OpenSSF wants to do with this in 2023, and how can we make Fresca a part of that? And separately, what else can we do from the Fresca side of things to make it more of that demonstrative example for build, where the idea would be, Fresca should be a shining example of here's how you could do salsa if you can't use something like GitHub Actions or some of those other things. As well as potentially also being something that is also a consumer of stuff like S2C2F, right? Where, hey, you're running a build, are you, is the things you're ingesting into the build, salsa compliant? Is it S2C2F compliant, and so on? Yeah.
No, that's super helpful. And so, what I characterized it here, and please let me know if I can close, is Fresca is not just a reference architecture, but an actual instantiation of it. It's an actual implementation. It's not just boxes and arrows. In theory, this is how it fit together, but like, hey, here are the actual binaries and tools that you use to create something that works.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. It's intended to be opinionated. It's intended to be the sort of thing where you can imagine it hits that like 70 or 80% use case box where, like, yeah, if you just have something simple, you have another Go app or you have another Java app, this is just a way to build it that is salsa compliant. And it's all kind of tied together in a nice way where you're getting, you get your spiffy Spire, you get your, secrets management, you get all that sort of stuff baked into a build system. And then, yeah, the other thing just sort of tied in there was that there was interest from the broader OpenSSF side. I've seen the term Sterling toolchain thrown around a few times.
Yes.
Yeah, so there was
yesterday.
Yeah. So there was this idea of a Sterling toolchain, and one of the things that was brought up was not necessarily that Fresca is the Sterling toolchain by any means, but sort of what Fresca is doing, where it's like, hey, we took some tools, we combined them together, we configured them, we wrote scripts to sort of tie everything together. That could be something that the OpenSSF is sort of interested in, is sort of taking more of these open source tools like that are part of OpenSSF or LF, and figuring out how to tie them all together to help secure applications. And then, for us, how do you could you use some of these tools together to help secure your supply chain?
Makes a ton of sense. I'm going to try and work some of that detail in here. I'll tag you in the doc, and I would love just your eyes on it as well as I work through this. Or you know what, I'm just going to give you edit access and start implicating you directly and stuff. Let's see, Melba, so on this one, it sounds like you were saying, hey, before we go after, let's get Kubernetes, shipping Salsa Providence, we should make sure that, our own OpenSSF tools, which we produce and maintain ourselves, should conform with our own best practices. Is that right?
Correct. And the main reason for that is really just work out the kinks, right? If you can't trust OpenSSF tooling, right, and our communities, our repos, then why would people adopt our stuff, right? So if we can get really good in OpenSSF, then I think more people are willing to adopt, is my take, right? Lead by example.
Yep. Okay. I'll work that in. I think that, to be honest with you, I think for 2023, I want to paint the picture that, our direction as major OSS projects onboarded. I think you're absolutely right. It's going to be difficult to even make the case that it's a good idea if we're not doing it ourselves. And we should, like you say, set the standard and walk the walk as well as talk the talk. So I know there's a team that I work with here at Google who've begun to kind of at least take inventory of OpenSSF projects and start to engage with them to look at, best practices. But I'll make sure that's in the document as well. I think it's I wrote it as inexcusable. I think it's kind of inexcusable that we don't have that today. Let's see. You made an ad here.
Yeah. So it seems as though we have sections except for Fresca, right? And so Mike has talked a lot about 2023 and potentially what he can do with Fresca. So why not call that out, as we're trying to enable adoption with tooling and Fresca is kind of centralized to it. And I don't know if this is going too far, but I almost want to even say, I think about the Salsa tooling. Why isn't the Salsa tooling handled by Fresca? Again, I don't know anything about the two. I know Mike does, right? But why have multiple tooling, right? Why not have one tooling for supply chain integrity? Go ahead, Mike.
Yeah, I can provide a little bit of that history. So when Salsa was originally spun up, there wasn't really any tooling sort of associated with it other than a couple of small little scripts. Fresca was already being built out, and then when City contributed Fresca to OpenSSF, we were looking at it just more as a build tool, but then it became something that could sort of integrate with Salsa, and then the idea would be to integrate a bunch of other things. And this is not to also diminish anything that the Salsa side is doing. Like, a lot of the stuff originally from the Salsa side was more like, here is a GitHub generator, here's an example of what it could be. I think those tools have gotten hardened where they're production systems in their own right. But the other thing that Fresca was intended to be was it was intended to be also agnostic to any underlying provider. So in this case, a lot of the Salsa tools by and large require either Google Cloud Build or require GitHub, whereas Fresca only requires Kubernetes. And so anybody can run it anywhere, which was another thing there. And then the other idea also was Fresca is not intended to be purely Salsa. Like, the idea also is to support SSDF, stuff like S2C2F. you know, as well as any other things that might come out, and try and be sort of maybe even go beyond what some of the standards currently define, and show what, like, hey, if you wanted a shining example, not everybody can adopt this because not everybody's there, but you could imagine this could, you know, hit a lot of those things.
That's super helpful for me to understand better this universe. I'm kind of I still have what Melba said ringing around my head, that should Fresca say, okay, you know what, we're the implementation side of the SCI working group, we're the implementation wing of this working group, and you know what, we have a reference architecture instantiated in a platform agnostic way. We have a suite of SALSA tools on the generation and verification policy side. We also are incubating tools to produce S2C2F attestations, and we just say, Fresca, you have a new scope. You are now tools for the SCI working group universe. Would that make sense? Is that something we should be thinking about?
I think that's maybe something that we want to have a little bit of that broader conversation with the OpenSSF generally, to see where they're going with some of it as well. Because I do think one is we do want to have like closer alignment with a lot of these different things. Like, so just as an FYI, right? Like our tool can also, like, we're looking to sort of support stuff like scorecards from OpenSSF and some of the other stuff's in there in Fresca. But I think it's worth a sort of a broader conversation with just sort of the OpenSSF's direction, just to kind of say, hey, we think, you know, if folks think it could be this thing, it could be this thing. I don't know. Like right now, I will say with the existing set of maintainers, we can support the build use case. If we wanted to kind of expand it into more of just like a lot of these other things, we would definitely need a few more resources working on it. But it's definitely something that I think, you know, we would be happy to have that discussion about, you know, supporting some of these other things. We just want to make sure that it's done in coordination with the rest of the OpenSSF, so that, you know, there's a lot of work that overlaps with some of these other things, and we want to make sure that we can kind of tie together in. Yeah,
that makes a ton of sense. I mean, I think with respect to resourcing, I could imagine like approaching that in parallel, where we could decide, hey, you know what, Fresca is responsible as a working group for the entire tools universe in supply chain integrity. Right now, it's only staff to support this part of the scope. So this subset of the scope is resourced. We have a roadmap for this subset. Maybe in 24 or 25, we'll have staffing and roadmaps for other areas. But at least nominally, conceptually, we think of the scope as this big, even though the staffing is way smaller. But I hear you that there are more conversations to be had here, including presumably with the OpenSSF tooling working group and so on. So we have, you know what, Joshua, I'm just going to invite you to opine directly on this and summarize your comment in voice form.
I've already forgotten what I've written. What did I say? Oh yeah, okay. So I think this was just the idea that SALSA, like when we first announced SALSA, a lot of folks were interested, and we tried to like describe what SALSA means to different audiences. And as we've refined the specification over time, we were increasingly realizing that this is mostly a useful document for people creating build systems and package ecosystems. And that made me wonder whether the the SCI working group could look at personas and try to think of like what the strategy is across those personas, which I think we've probably kind of gotten to already in the discussion during this meeting, but it wasn't clear to me from the the flow of the document when I was reviewing it earlier today. Did that make any sense?
It makes perfect sense, actually. And so I think that aligns with, I mean, really, if I take a step back, you know, the document opens with mission and vision. notably absent from the document so far is actual problem statement. And I don't think you can do a problem statement without anchoring in terms of who is experiencing this problem today, and that ties us to persona. So I think what we're saying is this document could usefully include a better articulation of what problems are we solving and for whom. And I totally agree with that. And I think, I mean, that speaks to a comment further down thread here in response to Mel, but I think that reasoning about the universe that we're in, independent of the solutions that we have today. Let's start from there. Like we happen to have in front of us S2C2F and Salsa and Fresca. Without talking first about the problem space, we can't assess whether these are good solutions or not. And so I think that we first need to say, what is the problem space? What problems are we solving and for whom? What challenges do they have today? Why are they the important and the right ones to solve? Now we can look at what do we have in our hands and what do we need to go build? How do we apply what we have to these problems? Where do we have gaps? Where do we have overlaps? Where do we need to think again? And it could be that we conclude, oh, well, you know what, for the problem space at hand, S2C2F and Salsa and Fresca already cover 75% of this. There's 25% missing. We need a fourth group, and here's what it's going to look like. We could conclude, gosh, actually, when we look closer at the problem and the personas, the people who care about the problem, S2C2F and Salsa and Fresca don't really directly address them, or we have bigger gaps than that. But I think that what you're speaking to, Joshua, is let's figure out, you know, who is it who's who's having challenges today, and what are we going to do for them, or you know what problems do we want to solve, and then we can assess the appropriateness of the solutions that we have and where the gaps are. Melba, I know you had thoughts on this too.
Now, I was looking for clarification, right? If some of the work that we started would help in this space, and it sounds like it will, but then there's the whole gaps, right? Like what gaps do we need to address based off of that, you know, macro view that we were working on?
Okay, I'm just going to make a note there. We need to have a better articulation of problem statements, and from there, we can start to talk about solutions and how well or they address the problems or not, how they fit together, and so on. So I'll take that up as something I can add to the document, and again, we can continue to iterate on it offline. I have just a meta comment quickly. I have been super encouraged by the amount of review comments and people reading the doc and throwing in comments and ideas and thoughts and asking for clarification. It's awesome to see this level of collaboration. And I want to say thanks to everyone who did that, and just encourage you all to jump in. And if stuff isn't clear, comment it. If you things could be worded better, go and make the suggestion. We're going to end up with a much better document for the fact we have a dozen people working on it than just one or two. So thank you. With that said, we've gone to top to the bottom through the doc looking at comments. I've obviously got a bunch of follow-up work to do to address much of this stuff. Unless there's anything else we want to cover on this topic, we can move to the next one. And I think Melba, you'd added 2023 future roadmap priorities. Is that right?
Yeah, so that's where for folks that weren't here in the last meeting for last year, I had brought up this topic, which resulted in this document that Isaac created. And so it sounds like, you know, and it looks like we're very much coming to an alignment on the vision. And the next step would be, okay, once we have alignment on the vision, what do we think we can accomplish in 2023? I do see the 2023 priorities, but you know, what are we truly aiming for collectively as a group for 2023? As an example, someone mentioned conferences, right? So as a working group, are we trying to target specific conferences, right? I know for Salsa positioning, I'm trying to target the Open Source Summit North America conference and represent the Salsa community, not IBM, but the Salsa community as a positioning group lead, and trying to invite the other leads as well. So I feel like we need that kind of prioritization of like, what are our, concrete deliverables, so to speak. And I think you have some of that documented, but I think if we all come to an agreement on what we want to drive towards, then that'll help set up the roadmap.
Love it. Josh, Michael.
Yes. Just jumping on conferences specifically, like there was Supply Chain Security Con co-located with one of the LF conferences. I forget which one. I think that might have been Open Source Summit.
Yeah, it is.
And I think it would be cool if like there was a formal adoption of that and continuation of that by the OpenSSF. And also, let's not restrict it to North America, because having to fly across the pond to have conversations with people is exhausting.
Yes, yes, of course. Yeah, that's just something that the deadline is on the 5th of February, and we're like, okay, let's just try to go for it. This is what we know about now. But yes, most certainly not just North America. Yeah.
I mean, it's not a criticism. It's a challenge, right? Because a lot of the co-located, well, a lot of the Linux Foundation events are larger in North America. They have more kind of participants in North America. More of the folks doing this kind of work, as evidenced by this call, are based in North America. And how do we, there's a challenge ahead of us as a lonely European, that how do we pull it over and have discussion here too? But I'd love for that to be kind of someone's, like a goal for someone. Maybe it's not for this group. Waxing lyrical a bit on that topic, I guess. So I'm going to defer to Mike.
Oh yeah, so yeah, there's a couple of things I echo Joshua's comment there, and also there was actually a surprising amount of folks over in Japan who have been poking around with Salsa as well. I know that one of the things that should also be a goal for us as well is, I think, to see how we can help foster some of those folks who are not on a time zone that makes this sort of time work for them. Whether it's Salsa or just, the supply chain integrity working group. So that could be potentially a goal. The other thing I was just going to say is, I think we should push on the OpenSSF leadership a little bit to do something similar to what the CNCF does, where they have like a maintainer track. So as opposed to us needing to pitch talks, if the idea here is like, hey, a couple of members from Salsa, the supply chain integrity working group, the supply chain integrity working group will have something like X amount of talks assigned to them, and then they can figure out like, okay, we're gonna have one talk on Salsa, one talk on S2C2F, another talk on implementations or whatever.
That makes sense to me. And I think, Melba, to your point about actual kind of, what work can we align to this stuff? I think potentially, I mean, not wanting to get too horribly corporate about it, but potentially we could turn, we got 2023 priorities or proposed ones in this SCI working group doc. We could reformulate those priorities in terms of things like objectives, and then we could look at mapping key results onto those objectives, forgive me, but something along those lines. I'm not ready to OKRs, but actually getting specific about, okay, if we think that these are our priorities, what specific work are we going to do, and what specific outcomes are we going to look to enable, and how will we measure those outcomes, and how will we talk about progress towards them, and so on. And so I think what you're speaking to is, well, yeah, it's great to have the vision doc and something that orients and guides us, but then we need to say, okay, there is actual work to be done, and things that need to be typed, and conversations that need to be had. Who is doing that? What those work streams look like, and how do we organize?
Correct.
That makes great sense to me. Okay, I think some of this work, and someone actually made a comment. I think it was Joshua, about general kind of collaboration. How do we? I think one of the failure modes, or one of the dangerous habits one can get in with these things, is making progress only synchronously during meetings at particular hours of the day. And I think that we need to try studiously to avoid that. And so I don't know to what extent we can get there straight away, but I would love to have, more, intra-meeting, discussion in Slack and collaboration with people commenting in docs and writing things, and asynchronous collaboration, using Slack as the kind of lockers of communication. But then, hey, we can have docs and we can have GitHub repos and we can have all kinds of things happening, and we don't have to save actual collaboration to occur in these meetings. I really totally agree with that. And so one of the things I'm going to try and push everyone in this working group to do is help me get the next revisionist doc together, so we have a great draft in time for next monthly meeting. But let's do that asynchronously in Slack through doc comments. If people would rather have this thing in Markdown and GitHub, I'm totally okay with that too. But I would like this working group to get into a mode of, default collaboration happens in between meetings. Meetings can provide a sync point and a roll up and just a checkpoint to look at course corrections. Obviously, a lot aligned, but the majority of the work should happen in the 30 days between meetings rather than the 60 minutes we have together each month. Michael, we have one more agenda item, which was the roadmap for Fresca. We've only got 4 minutes left. Do you want to attempt to kind of summarize it or drop a link into people to look at, or do you want to punt till next time?
Yeah, so we're actually the thing was going to be so our meeting is every other Wednesday at 10 a.m. So actually it's not today, it'll be next week. And next week we are looking to maybe work on the 2023 roadmap. Most likely one of the big things we're working on is we're building out using Q, pretty much a framework for configuring and tying everything together inside a queue, where the big idea here is, we would make it very, very simple, almost trivial for, an end user to just sort of plop in their Go code, their Java code, and it would automatically sort of, apply salsa and S2C2F and et cetera, all in there. And so we're looking for sort of collaborators on some of that stuff. That I think is the big one. We're also looking to maybe even have an initial sort of like pre-V, like some pre 1.0 releases of Fresca soon as well. And yeah, we're looking just to kind of get more contributors, anybody who might be interested in learning more about it. I can drop a link in the meeting notes with the sort of like calendar invite and whatnot.
Cool, thank you. Awesome. This has been great, super productive. Again, really appreciate all your collaboration, leaning into the document and the discussion. I welcome any feedback you want to provide offline or continued edits and comments in the doc. I got a whole bunch of work to do to incorporate some revisions from all y'all's feedback. And then I'll continue to ping in Slack and poke at people and nag you all to help make this awesome in time for next month. Thank you. Thank you, Mike. Thank you, Melba, in particular. You are doing absolutely fantastic work in positioning. I really appreciate your help with that and this and everything. Yay, Melba. Yes, big +1 on that, Joshua. Thank you. Sweet. Enjoy the rest of your day, everyone. Or a school snow day here in Boulder. Get out, build a snowman, have fun.
Thanks. Nice meeting you. This is my first call. Have a good one.
Take care, Rob.